I would like to ask just one question. I think these architects are really challenging, are living in a very challenging situation every time they want to put forward any of this concept. We all know that building in vertical, the restriction of area is it's crazy, and I do admire. In a way, I see you a bit of a utopian people that really trying to push things, and out of that becoming with different typologies. But or different ways for the typology. My question is, you're dreamers, you're people pushing, but what about the developers? You are your clients. How do you see them at this point? How much do you think is something that it comes out of them, or is your own energy convincing them? I think you have different situations.
Avanti, avanti, avanti,
Okay, well,
avanti.
I'll bring up one issue that I thought was interesting when Rafael showed his proposal for the World Trade Center. Many people thought it was extraordinary because the frame didn't, in fact, generate any square footage that could be leased, and it was personally my favorite scheme for the site. And I liked the fact that there was a void and it was a public armature that we could all experience. But a really interesting thing happened after that, which is that the Malkin family and those that controlled the assets, including the Empire State Building, they formulated a REIT, and in that REIT offering, they disclosed the financial modeling of the Empire State Building and how it worked. And a fascinating thing came up from that, which is that the observation deck of the Empire State Building generated more net income than the Empire State Building, than all of the other space put together, the observation deck alone. So there was a financial model if you were willing to unlock it and lobby for it. The observation decks are extraordinarily profitable, and it doesn't fit a normal model. So I guess what I would say is that there are financial models that when we're well informed, we as designers and architects can lobby for alternative ideas. You used the word different typologies. That was my quick thought.
Rafael?
Well, I think developers are great. It's just that they have to open up their minds to the same way that we do. But the interesting thing on this process is that this is sort of unstoppable. It may take longer than we're around, but it's a reality that has its grounds on a level of social responsibility, which well thought out, as we were saying before, and as Rick mentioned, may actually be the key for a lot more than just simply being nice, which actually is not that bad either, just being nice. But there is something to be said about the potentiality of new programs in a vertical structure. And they're there to be explored, and the development community would follow or would actually promote it. I mean, in many ways. I mean, I always say that our job is part of this large industry, which is the industry of development, and I think that's both in the private as well as in the public sector. And just to deny that is a little bit of an extreme, because we couldn't actually pay for any of these things to be built.
What about Chicago?
Well, I don't think you can talk about developers as being that there's only one kind. And my experience is that there are, at least in the extremes, at least two different developers. There's a developer who is most comfortable selling the space and telling people this is the most economical piece of office space that you can get, and that's what he is comfortable doing. And then there's another type of developer who wants to sell the highest level of quality, which ultimately ends up being getting the highest lease rate. And he searches for a way to justify that higher lease rate by having better public spaces, having a building have higher quality materials, and of course, the office the efficiency and the economy of the office space is always a factor. But the fact is that there are some developers who think of themselves as having a responsibility to the city and so forth, and that are trying to build the best possible building that they can build. And it is an economic enterprise. I mean, they do have to make the numbers work. But there are people who can figure out a way that if they build a little better building, that it can spend, they can collect a little bit, not a little bit more, a lot more rent and so forth. So there are two different attitudes with developers, at least two different, and then all the shades in between.
Thank you. Questions? I have a question over there.
Hello, good morning. This is Inigo Ortiz for Leon Architects from Spain. I have one question for the three speakers. I would like to know the drivers in the next 5 years of the three firms in terms of fashion drivers, architectural drivers. What are your drivers for the medium term?
I didn't understand anything. Sorry? Sorry, no, it's the sound system. What?
The drivers of your firms in the medium term. What the key points of...
La motivación de la oficina para los 5 años próximos.
To get some jobs. I mean, that's the only driver in this business. No, it's an interesting thing. I think that there is a growing perception in our particular discipline, but also in the development community, that there is a new paradigm, right? So that somehow the level of responsibility that we all collectively have is much larger than schools have allowed us to think it was, right? I mean, we really can do a lot of damage, and some good, but the important thing is to be aware of that. In that note, I want to make tell you a proposal that I have, for which most of my friends, developers, hate me, which is that I think they should have a license. See, developers should have a license because, they're ultimately the people that actually make the decisions. And this characterization that it is all about the responsibility for the financial performance of a job is really not quite right. I mean, is an important thing to assume the fact that there is an educational component in all of this. I mean, most people in every single discipline that operates with impact on the public realm do have a license. The three people here paid an incredible amount of money in liability insurance, most of which is pending upon the decision of somebody that has no connection with that, and that is to me a very curious situation. I mean, engineers, doctors, public officials of many kinds. I mean, need to fulfill some kind of a requirement to be able to operate. I mean, of course, I'm the only one that is proposing that, but it would be a nice thing.
That's quite a proposal.
Yeah, but it makes sense, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, they're the ultimate decision makers, right?
Right.
I mean, why wouldn't they be liable? Why should
I don't know if it's a license, but a way at least
A
you know,
license,
to.
a real license. Go to school. Take an exam. Like I just took
Well,
a
that's,
driver's license.
But part of what you do is educate, right? I mean,
Yeah,
part of
yeah,
what
but
you do
this
in
is-
your presentation is say,
But this is the problem, is that nobody pays you for this education. You see?
This
It's
is
the
the problem.
opposite. I mean, you know, we educate and they think they actually knew it before. I mean,
Any developer in the audience? Oh, we have a question here.
Yeah. I have two quick questions. My name is Mehmet Kılıç. I'm with Turner International from Istanbul, Turkey. First of all, my question is, does public authority offer any incentive due to your unique design? Like this can be zoning or it can be permit process. Maybe they are giving any incentive on that way. And the second question is, did you get any feedback regarding your unique design's effect on a sales price? Like it increased your square meter or square feet sales price, this percentage or that percentage? Thank you.
what's the first one?
Could you repeat the first question?
The
please?
first question was, does public authority have any kind of incentives because of your design, having public spaces within your building? Do they offer any kind of a special treatment as far as the zoning or permit application process or peer review kind of options?
Yes, most of the large-scale development done in New York is done in some kind of public-private partnership, and what that means is that you're trying to craft a design that is acceptable to both the city administration, usually the City Planning Commission, and the developer. So at One Bryant Park, the urban garden room, the Stephen Sondheim Theater, the widening of the sidewalks, the mass transit connection, all of those things were part of the negotiation in crafting a solution that they thought was appropriate for that site. Right now with the current administration, a big part of the modeling, the incentives, is affordable housing and access to open space for all citizens. So there's very clearly an idea that the city is pressuring, should you want to do discretionary development, pressuring to make sure there is a high degree of affordability for all citizens and a higher degree of accessibility to all the amenities. So there's no question that when you approach any kind of discretionary entitlement in New York City right now, that you'll be having conversations about view corridors, light and air, accessibility to open space, and affordable housing.
And your second question has a very simple answer, which is that we like to think that yes, it does have an effect on the selling price or the increased rent, but it's a very difficult thing to prove. I mean, you know what? Fundamentally, because it's a very difficult thing in our discipline to understand the level of performance of the product we produce. Mm-hmm. You know, this business of the star architect business, I mean, you know, it's also deformed the public perception of what is it that you're buying. I mean, this is not the same than Prada, say. I mean, you know, you can pay an extraordinary amount of money to buy a bag, say, because you like or you're stupid or whatever. But that's nothing compared to the price of any building. I mean, you know, this is major stuff. And major stuff not only in terms of production, in terms of, you know, resources, but it's fundamentally, you know, as I said before, there is a big chance you can actually screw it up. And people should be responsible for that in some fashion. So, there are in Manhattan a couple of name architect buildings that the developers would not tell you that they had failed to sell, but that's a reality too. And there are some that are absolutely great, done by fabulous colleagues that actually have contributed something to the building type that is remarkable. And the three towers that you were nearby, the richer put together. You know, amazingly enough, I mean, they produce a completely different perception of how one could live in the city. I mean, there were no glass residential buildings before him, and that's an important contribution, and I think people have paid a lot of money for that.
I've heard once that any building that goes beyond 70-story high, it's more expensive than the most expensive movie ever done by Hollywood. Which I thought it was a good reference, you know, because when you're talking about how much, that's when they tell you, and this was comparing to Avatar, okay, which is supposed to be the most expensive production, and that it's taken years and years of development, and I think it's interesting to make this comparison to meet the bag, which I think it's.
Yeah, but the theory of pricing is also interesting because, you know, then that's true, but how do you justify it? Say, for instance, Graf, this fabulous jeweler in Germany, sells a piece of diamond this big for $48 million, right? Now, who puts that price? I mean, you know, the people that pay it, right? That's it. That's, and, you know, his savviness to know how much he can get for it. Buildings require an enormous amount of investment. I mean, you know, it's no, I mean, just go around, look at a construction site. I mean, you know, thousands of man hours. I mean, amazing amount of material, disruption in the city, both before and after. I mean, it's an extraordinarily significant impact industry, and I think that it shouldn't be just reduced to the money equation, and it shouldn't be reduced to the superficiality of just wacky design. It's a serious thing.
Well, I think we've run out of time. I just want to connect, well, that we spoke about money in this last 5 minutes, but I think there's one thing about all the spaces that you've presented that is, from my point of view, priceless. And that could be another conversation, but
yes.
Not for today. Thank you very much, Rafael. Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you very much, James, for being here.